So this morning we're going to continue our sermon series, or not sermon series, our summer stories. We're going to do Summers Are for Stories, where we look at favorite stories in the Bible. We can learn so much about God, about man, about what it looks like to walk in faith through the different stories of the Bible. And today we're going to be looking at one of the granddaddies of them all, and we're going to be looking at David and Goliath. This is one of those stories that almost everybody within our culture has some familiarity with. And one of the things that we do whenever we preach is we want you maybe to see in a little bit different light than maybe the way it was described to you as kids, and to maybe get a little more of an adult version, a little more nuance within that. And so as I was preparing for this sermon, I was thinking a lot just about this idea of this overnight success. And a lot of times we see David within the story as an overnight success. And as I was processing through this, like there's so many things in our world where we finally learn somebody's name. We finally see their name in the big lights, and we're like, oh, they came out of nowhere. And in fact, there's a whole industry built around this, which was largely started with the TV show American Idol. You know, and I hate to break this to you, but most of reality TV isn't really as reality as it looks. I hate to tell you that, but one of the big stars, and a lot of the stars, this is true for American Idol, but one of them was Carrie Underwood, and she was brought out as this hometown girl from a small town that finally hit the big stage, and she was discovered out of nowhere. But what a lot of people miss is that she had a lot of development and practice. And even whenever she was 14 years old, she almost had a record contract with Capitol Records. She had been pursuing this for a long time, and she probably would have gotten that contract, but there was a change in management, and they just decided to go a different way. So she almost became a household name at 14, and then it wasn't until she was 21, 22 that she was on American Idol. But the way she was presented, the way they set it up, is they missed that she spent time in Los Angeles, that she had been singing on some pretty big stages. But they wanted to present her as somebody that came from nothing to something. But she had been working hard for a long time, just out of the spotlight. And then they were like, and out of nowhere, she just found herself in a line one day at American Idol and became this. But she had been working towards that for many, many years, and had almost broken through multiple times before American Idol came around. So the record executives, those kinds of things, they knew her name. And today we're going to be looking at David and Goliath in 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. It's in the Old Testament, and we talk about this a lot of times in the Old Testament, and we're looking at stories. A good question always to ask when we're looking at the Old Testament is, what does this show us about who God is? Because the God of the Old Testament, the Bible is broken up into two halves, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is before Jesus, but always points towards Jesus. The New Testament is about the life and work of Jesus, and then the launching of the church and that work that comes out of Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection. And in the Old Testament, before Jesus on the cross, that God is the same in the Old Testament as he is in the New Testament. But the beauty of it is our relationship with God is different in the New Testament because of the work of Jesus, but God is the same. And so we can learn a lot about God, and we can learn a lot about humanity and who we are by looking at the Old Testament. So even as we're looking at David and Goliath today, be asking that question: who is God and who is man, and how does that relationship work? Because God remains the same, just our relationship with him is a little bit different today than it was in the Old Testament. So we're going to be looking at, starting in verse 17 with David and Goliath. So to set this up and where we're at is, it was common for there to be a season of wars and battles and this time of year. And this would have been a relatively common scene that would have happened. There was a valley, and up on one hill was the Philistine army, and up on the other hill was the Israel army. And they would sit there and they would camp out and they would yell things at each other. They would get up every day prepared for battle. But they knew if they just went straight to hand combat against each other, it'd be bloody and gruesome. And so a common practice would be is you send out your best warrior, and we'll send out our best warrior. And whoever wins this battle wins whatever their space or land or that they're fighting over at this point in time. And this would happen year after year. And this is just another one of those seasons of battles. And this time we're introduced to a new character within this season, and his name is Goliath. And so we're going to learn about him starting in verse 4, 17, verse 4. Then a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet 9 inches tall and wore a bronze helmet and bronze scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. There was a bronze armor on his shins and a bronze javelin that swung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of him. He stood and shouted to the Israelite battle formations. "Why do you come out to line up in the battle formation?" he asked. Asked them, "Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul?" By the way, hold on to that. We're going to come back to that in a minute in verse 8, where he says, "Are you not a servant of Saul?" Okay, continuing on in verse 8. "Choose one of your men and have him come down against me. If he wins a fight against me and kills me, we will be your servants. But if I win against him and kill him, then you will be our servants and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other." Then Saul and all Israel heard these words from the Philistine. They lost their courage and were terrified. Let's pray. God, thank you for your word today. Give us understanding and wisdom to apply it to our lives, to understand who you are, who we are, and how we can better serve you. In your holy name I pray. Amen. So this Goliath is a big dude. He's over 9 feet tall. Like, he's carrying hundreds of pounds, 100 pounds of armor that's on him. His spear is big. The head of the spear is big. And there's even a guy walking out in front of him with this shield. Like, they see him and they're looking at Goliath and saying, "We can't beat him." Israel is seeing a giant. They are seeing something that by their measurement, they can't conquer. He's taller than us. He's stronger than us. He's bigger than us. Just the optics of it, we can't beat him. And nobody's ever beaten Goliath because he is so big and he is so strong. And he comes out every day and mocks them and says that, "Why won't you come out?" And all of Israel and Saul shrinks. I don't remember if you remember, but a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Saul being anointed. And if you remember, the reason why Saul was picked is because Saul was tall, he was strong. Saul looked like a king. But if you remember, even early on, whenever they were looking for Saul, whenever they were going to bring him before Israel, Saul was hiding behind the luggage because he was scared of that moment. And here again, probably the best warrior, the tallest, the strongest guy on the field, he's hiding behind his army. And every time this Goliath comes out, he calls them out and says, "You guys are the servants of Saul. Who's going to come out to attack us?" Saul is shrinking back behind the army. The army is scared and they are pulling back because they see this giant. Now, there was a guy that wrote a book a few years ago, not a Christian book, but he did have some interesting perspectives on this. And his name was Malcolm Gladwell, and wrote a book called David and Goliath. And he's like, they were scared of Goliath, but somebody this big with these dimensions and this much weight and everything else, like, he probably really wasn't that great of a warrior. He's just big. He just looks big. He looks intimidating. He looks like he could kill everybody. But in reality, it would have been difficult for him to move, and a lot of what he had was just for show. And so where Israel saw a giant, he may not have been as big or scary as they thought that he was. And sometimes in our lives that there are things that come up against us and we make them out. We let our minds run wild. We let the optics of it and what they look like on the outside intimidate us, where it may not really be as intimidating as we think it is. But we pull back. We don't step forward into it. Some of you guys, like I think everybody in this room, there's something in our life that we are facing right now or going to face that's going to look big. It's going to look unconquerable. We're going to be scared. We're going to be afraid to face it because we may get destroyed in this process. And for these people, for the Israelites at this time, it was Goliath. We don't know how to take him on because look at how big he is. And so for 40 days, this happens. And then we're going to jump in here to first, and then as he's coming out day after day, sorry, jump ahead of myself. We see David. And David is being told, hey, your brothers, your 3 older brothers, they're standing on the front lines. They're out there. They're at war. And they're just telling little David, who has been anointed the next king of Israel at this point in time, who's still being a shepherd, still being a good son, and his job and responsibility is to go check on his brothers, bring them food, make sure they're okay. So every now and then he's going down to the battle lines with loaves of bread, with grain, with cheese to give to the commanders. And one day as he's doing this, Goliath comes out and insults the armies. And David's just sitting there. I mean, can you just imagine it? I don't know, like as a dad, I've had these moments before where there's something going on and my kids like run behind me and they're like, don't worry, my dad's here. And I'm like, I don't know what you expect me to do. That guy's big. Like, I'm going to shrink back also. But my kids are like, don't worry, my dad is so big. Okay, I don't know if my kids have ever said that. But you don't want to, I'm sure I don't know. So anyway, but that's kind of this image that this Philistine comes out. The image that we have here is David's like, here we go. Philistine's about to get it. He's coming out against the people of Israel and they're going to come out. And then David looks around and he goes, where's Saul at? What's Saul doing? Why is he shrinking back? Why are my older brothers shrinking back? Why are all these men shrinking back as he comes out over and over again? He goes, what happens if they win, if they're able to become victorious? If they're able to win and they're like, the soldier who does this is going to be so rich. He's going to be given so much money. He's going to be given, I don't know if this is good or bad. I never saw Saul's daughters. But they're like, he'll be getting Saul's daughters in marriage. I don't know if that was a good thing or bad thing, but you get his daughters in marriage. And on top of all that, you wouldn't even have to pay taxes on all this for the rest of your life. You're going to be set. And David is sitting there and he's like, what are you guys doing? I love this in verse 26. I don't think I have this on the screens. At the end of verse 26, after hearing all of this, David is just perplexed. And he says, just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David hears all this and he's like, this is free money, people. This guy's insulting Israel. He's insulting God and the armies of God. All you got to do is step up there and you get Saul's daughters. Maybe that's why they weren't stepping up. Okay. And so Saul hears this and he goes, who is this man that is willing to speak this way and calls for David? And David is going to Saul and saying, I can do this. Don't be discouraged. I will go and fight the Philistine. And this is where we jump in verse 34 as David is making his argument to Saul. So verse 34 in chapter 17, it says, David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after and struck it down and rescued the lamb from the mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur and strike it down and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears. The uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. Then David said, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul had his own military clothes put on David. He put on a bronze helmet on David's head and had him put on armor. David strapped his sword on over the military clothes and tried to walk, but was not used to them. I can't walk in these, David said to Saul. I am not used to them. So David took them off. Instead, he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in a pouch in his shepherd's bag. And then, with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Israel saw a giant. David saw God's faithfulness. David had been trained for this moment. David was confident in this moment, not because he was a skilled warrior, but because he was a skilled shepherd. God had been preparing David for this moment as he was tending his father's sheep. Not only was he being prepared to be a king by learning how to lead sheep, but he was being prepared to be a warrior while he's out there. I mean, imagine a young man and the long days that he has out there with the sheep, and he's sitting out there with this sling, and I mean, he's probably just picking up stones wherever he's going because he's bored and just whipping them around and throwing them at a tree, throwing them at a stump, throwing them at something. And then there were occasions where a lion would come up against a sheep, and you can't go back to your father and say, sorry, Dad, sheep are dead, lion, bear. And whenever the lion would come, he would step forward. He didn't step back. He stepped forward against the lion. He stepped forward against the bear. And every time that he stepped forward in the name of the Lord against the lion and the bear, he saw the Lord bring him victory. I love it. He's like, even when they reared up against me, I grabbed them by their fur and I would kill them. And there's so many times in our lives where you may be looking at your life and like, why does God have me with sheep? Why does God have me where he's at? But God was preparing David to be a king, and he was preparing David for Goliath. And you look at, kind of this situation that's coming up, and that these people didn't see what God was developing and building. And it looks like David's going to step out here, and he's a nobody. But David is a man who's been spending time with the Lord. He is a man who's been getting groomed, developed, prepared by the Lord out with the sheep and out in the pastures. And Saul tries to put his armor on David, and David says, I don't know this. I don't know this gear. If I'm going to go out there, I need to go out there how I've been training, how I've been prepared. I need to use my skills and my giftings in this situation. I can't go out as Saul. I have to go out there as David, because David was preparing me for this battle, and I need to go out as David. So let's look at what happens here. I think we all know what happens, but let's read it anyway. In verse 45. So before that, David goes out into the field. Goliath comes out. He's insulting David. And I love this. Like, trash talking is one of the best parts of sports sometimes. And we get some solid trash talking here by David. Verse 45. And David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel. You defied them. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. Today I will strike down and remove your head and give the corpse of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the wild creatures of the earth. Then all the world, check this out, then all the world will know that Israel has a God. And this whole assembly will know that it is not by sword or by spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will hand you over to us. Then the Philistines started toward to attack him. David ran quickly to the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in the bag, took out a stone, slung it, hit the Philistine in his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down to the ground. David defeated the Philistine with a single stone. David overpowered the Philistine and killed him without having a sword. Come on. Why was David out there that day? Was he out there that day so everybody would know David's name? Everybody would say, it's David. David's great. David killed him. No. David stepped out on that field that day because he knew the battle was already won, and he knew that that Philistine was talking trash about God, and that day, God was going to redeem his name. You don't want to go into a battle talking trash on God, because God wins at the end of the day. And David knew if the man came against him and came against God, God would win. The Philistine, Goliath, made a mistake. He saw a sissy Saul, and he said, I'm not afraid of Saul, but he learned that day he should have been afraid of God. And David stepped out on the field not to make his name great, not to let everybody know that David is in town. He stepped on that field today to let them know that God is the God of Israel. And he is superior to any 9-foot something tall giant. And the victory belonged to him. And we look at that, and so often the miracle that comes up is that this scrawny little boy who had this one stone and had these 5 stones and threw it with one stone, and God with this miracle hit the Goliath. The miracle didn't happen in that moment. God is a God who lives in all time at the same time, and God has a plan, and God is developing. And God had been preparing David all this time. The miracle happened with the bear. The miracle happened with the lion. The miracle happened with the shepherd. The miracles happened whenever David was getting prepared. And this point in time, we look at it and we're like, how did this happen? It's because God was working all along. As some of you are in battles right now and facing a Goliath, and you're looking for a miracle in the moment, but you may have already been being prepared to be victorious in that moment. But you see this giant, and you're saying, I don't have the sword to defeat him. You're saying, I don't have the shield to defeat him. I'm not big enough to defeat him. And God says, but I gave you a slingshot. You know how to use the slingshot because Saul tried to put his armor on David, and David said, this isn't me. This isn't how God prepared me. God has gifted each of you individually, and your giftings are different. They look different. He's prepared you differently. Have that relationship with God where you know, God's what God is doing in my life. This is how God is preparing me. That whenever that battle comes, you can rest and have comfort that God has prepared me for this moment. You know from past faithfulness that God will be faithful in this moment, and you don't have to be afraid because he may have a sword, but you have a stone, but behind that stone is the power of God. And you know it because you've slung that stone 100 times. You've slung that stone every morning whenever you wake up and you spend time with the Lord. You've swung that stone whenever somebody comes against you with lies and tries to tarnish your name. You didn't have to fight for yourself, but you let the Lord fight for you. You've fought those battles whenever there was financial troubles, job troubles, health troubles, and every single time you see the Lord come victorious in different ways every time. But you've trusted in him, and he remains God over and over. And in this situation, you step out onto the battlefield once again, just another day. He's just another bear, just another lion, but my God remains the same. Takeaways. Remember God's faithfulness. Remember what God has done in your past to give you the strength to be in the future, to be in the present, to do battles in the future. So often, God provides a miracle in our past, protects us in our past, is there for us in our past, walks for us in the past, and then sometimes we think today's different than the past. And the God who walked with us in the past, the God who protected us in the past, we think that he's going to forget about us in the present. That God who was with you in those lonely times, that God that was with you in that training preparing season, that God was with you in that last battle that you were in, he's going to be with you again. The greatest thing we can build our faith in the future is our faith from our past. Trust the hidden preparation. This is especially true for young people, and all the teenagers just left. So many young people want to shun the preparation stage, want to shun the time of getting prepared, shun the time of doing the work in private. But so often in those moments, God is developing you. God is preparing you. God is working on you. Embrace those moments, even though you may be like, I'm only a shepherd, but I think I might be a king. David was prepared to be a king with the sheep. David was prepared for the battle with Goliath, not on the battlefield, but where nobody saw him whenever the bear and the lion came. He learned how to hone those skills and hone that faith then. Takeaway number 3. Don't wear someone else's armor. Know how God has created you. Know how God has gifted you. Everybody has a strength. Everybody has a gifting that God has provided you. If you are a follower in Christ, he has gifted you in unique and special ways. Don't be jealous of somebody else's armor, somebody else's gifting. Don't wish you had that, because God needs you in the body of Christ, and God has a plan for you, and you are not a mistake. Where you're at, what you have, he has developed that in you. And so often, our greatest weakness and our greatest strength are closely aligned. People looked at David and said, all he has is a sling. He doesn't know how to wield a sword. But think about it. On that battlefield, the way the situation is set up, the sling's going to beat the sword every day. The dude is huge, carrying a ton of weight. David can just run around and throw stones at him all day. The miracle is that God did it in one shot, but eventually he was going to hit the guy. But everybody else, and even in here, it's like he did it without a sword. He did it without a sword. Because the slingshot is better than a sword in that situation. They're all so surprised, and we look back and we're like, well, duh. And God says, I got this. I got this. Don't wish you had the sword whenever God's been preparing you with the slingshot. Because you may be evaluating by the wrong things. Everybody else was evaluating by the wrong things. And all he had to do was just throw a bunch of stuff. Like, the guy's not going to catch him. He's not going to catch him. And lastly is this. In the Bible, we really don't see overnight successes. It looks like that a lot of times. Sometimes you can read a story and seem that way. But think of so many of the great heroes of the Bible. God had been preparing them. You look at Moses. Moses wrote a large chunk of our Bible in the Old Testament. He led the Israelites out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea. But God put Moses in a basket as a baby, and he was raised in Pharaoh's house. One of the gifts that God was doing with Moses, he was raised to be one of the most highly educated men and leaders that the world at that point in time had seen, because he was raised by Pharaoh. You look at Paul, another man who wrote the majority, or a large chunk of our New Testament, one of the most prolific authors in the New Testament. Before he became Saul, I mean, it looks like it was just like this magic thing that he was on the road to Damascus, and one day he's going to kill Christians, and the next day God is using him to lead the Christian movement. But before that, Paul was raised probably in a very wealthy home. And Paul had been trained by some of the greatest educators and teachers of that time, well before he started doing the work that we know of as Paul today. We have this American desire sometimes that we can just be plucked out of nothing and become something. And you may not be this success or be who you think you should be today, but that doesn't mean that God isn't working. That doesn't mean that God isn't working. In the words of my daughters, let him cook. He may be doing something in your life, preparing you for something right now. Embrace that time, embrace that season, because the battle's going to come and the opportunity is going to be there. And whenever he does, you'll be ready because you'll have the Lord with you and you've been prepared and honed by him. Let's pray.